Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the Executive Dialogue 1 on the uptake of carbon pricing market on businesses in India, opportunities and challenges. We'd like to open the floor for Q&A for the last 10 minutes, so the entire audience is requested to keep posting their questions in the chat box on your right side. A very quick thank you to our sponsors for the event as well. We have our platinum sponsors, that is Danfoss, our gold sponsors, The Breathe, silver sponsors, Saint Gobain and Smart Jewels, all of whom have helped us make this event very successful today. So, without much ado, I'm going to start introducing our speakers for this particular session. May I first call upon Mr. Suvojoy Sengupta. He's a partner at McKinsey Gurgaon and leads McKinsey India's power and renewable energy practice in India. He brings 26 years of experience serving global energy companies across Europe, the Middle East, and India. Suvojoy has worked with leading companies in the power and renewable energy sector. It's a pleasure to have you amongst us today, sir. Second, I'd like to invite Mr. Manish Dabkara. He's the CMD and CEO at EKI Energy Services Limited, the world's largest carbon credit developer and supplier. He also founded NKing International in 2008 to lead companies worldwide to a future of net zero carbon emissions. Welcome, sir. Next, I'm going to call upon Mr. Vinod K. Kala. He has been a very active participant in the climate change market since 2004. He founded Emergent Ventures India and many associated ventures, supporting the creation of 15 gigawatt plus renewable capacity and having developed pioneering models such as large scale renewable aggregators, wind solar hybrids, grid interactive solar irrigation utility anchored solar rooftops, and utility anchored charging infra. It's a pleasure to have you amongst us. Lastly, I'd like to invite Mr. David Yu. David has been involved in the environmental sustainability and renewable energy sector since 2012. As the corporation solutions partner of Asia Clean Energy Partners, he advises and provides solutions and technical know how to address commercial clients' twin compatible goals of economic prosperity and environmental sustainability. He has more than 2 decades of experience in business and operations in multinational companies. A very warm welcome to each one of you. Over to you, Mr. Suvojoy.
Thank you, Afsha, and welcome everyone to this very important and interesting discussion, hopefully over the next 60 minutes or so. I think we've got a very eminent and distinguished set of colleagues on the panel with a lot of real life experience in this important topic of carbon markets and hope to get the maximum benefit from their expertise and knowledge as we go forward. So we would love to take questions from your side in terms of the topic itself. The format we will follow is we will start. I will make a short presentation of about 10 minutes in terms of the carbon markets on the topic that is on hand today, recognizing that we have a number of participants here who might have different levels of understanding of this topic, carbon markets. So we will cover a little bit of the basics of that as well. So bear in mind, I think that some of the more advanced and expert participants might find this a little bit of a 101, but we thought for the benefit of everyone, we just cover the basics a little bit in this presentation and then set it up in terms of how it is evolving in India, what are the opportunities and challenges. Then we will go around to Vinod, David and Manish in that order and hear their experiences and their perspectives. And then get into the Q&A and the discussion. So if that's okay, can we start the switch over to the presentation? I'm sharing my screen now. Hopefully you can see the screen. So I think, we wanted to start with a little bit, why is this important? The whole topic of carbon pricing, why is carbon priced and how is carbon priced? And this is really the starting point of 101. As we are going towards, sustainability is going to be the defining theme and topic of over the next few decades, and with a number of countries as well as companies announcing their net zero aspirations, including India, which has announced a net zero 2070. So, carbon pricing is an important enabler for achieving these objectives in terms of um, controlling the greenhouse gas emissions and putting a price in terms of the carbon dioxide that is emitted. It gives an indication and a signal, economic signal to businesses and assets to reduce and discontinue their CO2 emission activities, as well as incentivize projects which are providing abatement and absorption of carbon and stimulate the development of technologies. So we see two different types of models. One is a carbon tax, which some countries have gone for, which is a certain price per ton of CO2. And the other is, which is more the focus of today's discussion, is a carbon market or an emission trading system, or ETS. You might have heard of that, where there are different companies or countries or entities who have certain target that they have to achieve, and they can therefore buy carbon credits in this market. The two types of models, the cap and trade and the baseline and credit, we won't go into the details of those, but that's what basically the carbon market is. There are projects or entities who are creating these carbon credits, and the polluting entities who are buying these carbon credits, and the market provides a clearing mechanism for the same. So what is a carbon credit? It's a certificate that represents 1 metric ton of CO2 equivalent that is either prevented from being emitted in the atmosphere or removed from the atmosphere as a result of a project. And there are two types of markets. One is called a compliance market, and the other is a voluntary carbon market. And today's focus is on the voluntary carbon market, which is the credits that are traded on a voluntary basis rather than a process of compliance. So a typical carbon reduction project, the first three steps are quite self-explanatory: design project, validate and certify project, and develop project. So any kind of a renewable project or energy efficiency project, important to have a validation. The second point here, which is that the project is validated and certified, that the uh, carbon credits that are going to be generated by the project will be independently validated and verified. Then operate and verify the impact and sell the carbon credits on a market. So carbon trading is not new. Initially started in the late 80s, but it's really picked up steam over the last few years. We'll cover that. And the trading market, therefore, gives the mechanism for the framework for the trading of the carbon credits. We talked about the ETS. In India, the carbon trading are traded on the MCX, the first exchange in Asia to trade carbon credits. And we see that in some cases, in some examples which I mentioned here, that emission trading systems, ETS, schemes are getting linked across countries, across borders. So the examples of California and Quebec and EU and Switzerland, where emissions being traded in one system can be linked or cross traded across different systems. This is an important part because in many cases, important enabler in the market, and we will hear about that from the panelists later, for companies in India who are generating carbon credits and they're looking to sell in other countries. I think COP26 also had some guidelines around this, and we'll hear from Vinod and others a little bit later on this. I'm going to skip these next couple of pages, which are the two types of markets. Now, this is important from an India point of view to say what are the typical types of projects which can generate carbon credits. I think renewable energy, obviously a very important one, solar, wind, but also biomass and others, where biomass is being used to replace coal or gas or other fossil fuels. Energy efficiency, a very important one, especially in the context of this forum, that where you're doing an industrial or community focused energy efficiency project, and therefore thereby avoiding the use of fossil fuels or incentivizing fuel switching or waste heat recovery, those kinds of elements where the carbon credits can potentially be generated from these types of projects. And as we said that independent assessment standards and certification is very important. Some of the criteria that they're used. It's important that some of these that real and measurable, that this is actually realized and quantified through a recognized methodology. Additional that this project not been undertaken, it wouldn't have been generated or realized, and the project itself would not have been undertaken without the proceeds from the sale of carbon credits, and unique and traceable. So these are again different standard bodies use different measurement criteria, but this is a general set of criteria that many of these certification bodies use. Now, coming to the how this is developed in India, and India it is one of the fastest growing markets in the world in terms of issuing of carbon credits, and a number of projects are there. So we say that there are 253 million CERs, probably even higher now, but there's many projects and many companies who are generating these. And one of the largest beneficiaries of the total world carbon trade through CDM, about 31%, and 850 projects. We already mentioned that the MCX is starting to trade. However, I think there's still a long way to go. India still doesn't have a proper policy for trading of carbon in the market. This is something we hope to hear again from the panelists as going forward, how the framework and the policy is going to develop. But a domestic ETS for India, as well as a more structured, formal policy around this, will be very important, because it's not just Indian projects which are generating the carbon credits, but more and more we will hear from industrial companies, steel, cement, chemicals, data centers, many of them who are already in the process of announcing their net zero targets, and they would be looking to also buy carbon credits in order to make this work. So of the total projects registered under CDM, about 17% are registered in India. So that's an important starting point. And out of the total CERs issued, 12.6% were issued by India. So this is something which is already starting to take shape. And this is the last slide from my side. I think there are still several pain points that need to be addressed in order for the market to scale and reach full potential. I think there's a important matter of trust, when especially for overseas buyers, that are the project is the project really according to the standard? Are there any reputational risks, etc.? Financing and resources availability for suppliers is an important part. And then there's regulatory linkages across different markets, how that's going to come about. So this is still, I think, a number of these barriers or concerns when it comes to trading in the carbon markets. But as we go forward, I think we see that the carbon markets are a very important enabler for going towards a net zero target and achieving the long-term aspirations of a 1.5-degree pathway, as well as providing the right kind of financial incentives for the clean tech investment in clean tech projects and new technologies going forward. So I think this has got to feature in the future roadmap globally as well as in India, and hopefully the policy framework is going to fall in place. With that, I will close the presentation from my side. I'll stop sharing. And if we can move to the panelists now to take forward the next level of the discussion. I would start with Vinod. I think, you've been active long before many other participants. I think we were talking about probably now 15 or 17 years that you've been active in this market. What has been the journey so far? And, you can share a little bit how it has evolved. What's your outlook for the carbon markets in India going forward?
So the markets, the CDM market, when it evolved, it generated a phenomenal interest in the corporates as well as investors. A lot of players came into the market. The entire ecosystem developed between 2005 to 2011. The methodologies were matured. The errors which could be resulting in inappropriate issuance of carbon completely went down. So this market actually did by 2011 develop into very, very interesting and very good market, and that also was reflected in increasing demand and prices that happened. But 2011, because we could not continue in the next phase because of political, let's say, disagreements between countries, uh, the prices collapsed, and therefore, from an Indian perspective, the CDM market kind of really went down in terms of pricing from almost 20 euros at some point in time, the CRs, to something as low as $0.5 or $0.6 a credit. So the pricing really collapsed, and now it has come back again. So in the meanwhile, from 2008, 2009 onwards, we started developing, voluntary market, where the regulatory people didn't come across, but there were corporates who were willing to kind of still buy credits from qualified projects, and therefore new standards developed, which is what Manish was kind of talking about. Voluntary emission market, developed in both gold standard as well as Vera, which is now called Vera. And this market, therefore, is now essentially driven by not much of regulation as much as it is driven by the corporates' voluntary demand. As corporates are now, kind of targeting net zero emissions, carbon neutrality, most large emitters are in fact thinking of that. More than 3,000 companies have signed up for such kind of commitments already, and we are expecting that almost all most emission intensive sectors, this will become a global phenomenon, both for investors to look at corporates which are actually compliant with this kind of approach, some kind of a pathway to becoming zero emission entities, as well as customers. So customers are demanding a lot now, in terms of their supply chains and what kind of products they want to buy, both the final end customers as well as intermediate business customers. So I see that that it is, to just give you some sense, from a 200-300 million tons kind of a market condition today, global market for VRs, this could be almost 12-13 billion tons kind of a market in about 10 years, 15 years time frame. So it's a very large expansion that is expected. Sectors have started to come in, like airlines have now have a sectoral definition of their own standard and they want to buy. Shipping could come into play, metals could come into play, green metals could evolve. So there is definitely a demand push. There is now increasing interest from suppliers because the prices started to move up. So different kinds of credits sell between anywhere between, let's say, $4 to $5 to as high as $13-14. So prices are moving back again as far as this market is concerned, and the internal market prices in places like Europe or Japan are as high as 30 euros to 50 euros as well. So prices already kind of moved up. Now the issue is how the market will evolve depends on what happens by the government in terms of policy, in terms of whether they will meet the NDCs through internally generated, kind of credit, so they will allow the trade to happen. And if there is internally generated credit, then will they have an internal market, which is what the debate is happening in India as well as in other markets. So I think some of these uncertainties are hanging, but yes, there is a clear commitment from investors, customers, suppliers. I think everybody trying to now become, going on a path of a carbon neutrality. So there's a very good interest. And I'm sure this time the market will actually be a more stable market. So my comments are over.
Thank you, Vinod. I think just one question before we move to David is, this idea of cross-border trade, and while these local kind of national markets are developing, for this to really take off, we were discussing yesterday about COP26 giving a certain direction in this regard. How do you see that developing?
So this Article 6, which was negotiated in this COP26. This is to me, right, Suvojoy?
Yes.
This question is to me, or?
Yes. Yeah.
So this Article 6 negotiations in COP26 essentially meant that countries now will need to meet their NDC targets, and the countries can meet their NDC targets essentially from the credits generated within the country, right? Now, the problem is that if you actually are trading these credits and they are going to some other country, the question is, in that case, does it actually qualify to meet your target as well as a country which is generating the credits, right? So this confusion is there, and I think the solution would be either a very comprehensive development of internal market. That means there are obligated entities who can buy the credits internally, and therefore the cross-border trade is, or otherwise a combination where the cross-border trade is allowed, but in some adjustments to the NDC. Some such kind of mechanism will have to be evolved, and that discussion is going on in India for development of internal market. And I think soon enough, maybe within 6 months or so, we should have some clarity on exactly how this will be done. Till the time, cross-border trades are happening.
Thank you, Vinod. I think we move to David now, and if you can share your overall comments and then one or two follow-up questions on that.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Suvojoy. Thanks for inviting me to this session. So, for the last couple of months, we see there's a very growing strong interest in carbon credit and RECs in the ASEAN region. And the demand has also affected an upward trend in prices, especially on REC or renewable energy certificates. So buyers are mainly from Singapore, and the RECs and credit requested can be from anywhere in ASEAN, in Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, even India and China. So many of these buyers that we encountered are trying to offset their corporate annual emissions, and this means buying for their regional location as well. So they're doing some kind of a regional buy on the behalf of their subsidiaries. And we see that this growing interest actually came upon strong influence from international companies who have committed to achieve net zero. I mean, this will ultimately, in time to come, affect their supply chain partners, which is contributing to their scope 3. And also there are the influence from RE100 companies targeting to use 100% renewable energy for their businesses, and that's where the RECs come from. So in short, I think this encourages more projects to start originating credits or RECs for, of course, financial incentive. Nevertheless, I think there should be still a balance between financial reward versus environmental concern. And we should not lose sight of the purpose, which is essentially at the end of the day, this project are really to reduce global emission. So I guess from what mentioned by Vinod earlier on about prices, yes, we do see that prices has gone up, interestingly. Looking at the days of credits that's below $1 US is gone. We have not found that. We have found that to be interesting, especially on the last quarter 3 and quarter 4 of 2021. And this seems to be, it could be a bit influenced by COP26, but even after COP26, I guess the prices sticks. And then with regards to cross-border trading, and just a bit of adding on to what Vinod has just mentioned, I think what he says is very accurate. It's true that on the country perspective, it's very difficult for the country to then determine how do they control the NDC. But at this juncture of time, since Article 6 has not been enforced, or it will take some time for them to enforce, it doesn't stop corporate from doing such kind of trading. And you can see that buyers are buying from anywhere, and prices again are one of their ticket point or their main point to trying to get credits. So again, I guess we're looking at this in the perspective that prices and demand are two things that is going to affect pricing in the market. And I believe that this will be the same also for the Indian market.
Thank you, David. I think you mentioned RECs, which is the Renewable Energy Certificate. And I think, for the benefit of the group in terms of carbon credits and RECs, how do you see these? I think you mentioned that in Asia Pacific, it's more the RECs which are more in demand in order to decarbonize the energy usage, the scope 3 emissions. How do you see the difference between the two and opportunities in both?
Sorry, I only got part of your question.
The question was, you mentioned, the renewable energy certificates, RECs, at the beginning of your overview or in your comments. So I think, these are kind of two parallel, the RECs and carbon credits are kind of two parallel sets of instruments. And, you mentioned that, the demand is early demand for RECs. So how do you see the demand for RECs versus carbon credits and, the markets for both evolving?
Thank you. Well, first thing is REC is of course a product that's similar to, in terms of the purpose, is similar to that of credits. The only thing is REC come from renewable energy, whereby credits is basically used to is taken from a reduction of emission from any kind of projects. The origination of REC is of course a lot more cost competitive as compared to credits. And in terms of companies, most of them, if you look at how corporate works, they will go through one of the easiest methods to reduce their emission, and one of the easiest methods is actually reduce their scope 2. And this will be going via REC. And due to that, the demand of REC actually gone up significantly for the last, I would say, 18 months. Prices has, especially on market that is like in Singapore, which there are shortfall of renewable energy projects, prices of REC has gone up significantly to, it could be as high as 50 Singapore dollars per RECs. And this was unheard of 18 months ago when REC was purely just spoken, and it could be just in matter of dollars. So I believe that when the demand in REC in the Singapore context, they can't fill it, then they will look into neighboring countries, because as part of the agreement under the Singapore REC or REC standard, they're allowed to buy RECs from neighboring countries at this juncture of time. And then of course we have guidelines from RE100 organization, which says something like that there's a grid connection requirement. But nevertheless, I think at this juncture of time, it's really about a buyer and seller, whether how do they want to present themselves to their stakeholders, especially when they present their sustainability report. So REC prices will definitely go up because it's definitely more attainable compared to RECs, compared to carbon credit. Sorry.
Thank you, David. Let's move to Manish. If you can request you to share your initial comments on the market.
Yeah, so I want to start. Thank you, Sujay. So I want to start with the types of carbon credits which are available these days in the market, and how few corporates are there here in India who are using the carbon offsets to make themselves either carbon neutral or to achieve net zero targets. But majority, like for the Indian offsets, what are all generated these days here in India, or not, in fact, these days, but for last you can say 7-8 years, we had observed like 95% of the carbon offsets used to get exported to the developed nations. So the whole world, you can say, is, as of now, since the Paris Agreement, Article 6, and the domestic carbon markets, regional carbon markets, international carbon markets at the compliance level may take some 1 to 3 years time to get their place in the market. So I was telling about the two types of market. One is the avoidance based carbon credits, and another one is the absorption based carbon credits. So absorption based carbon credits maybe again can be divided into two categories. One is the technology based carbon sequestration technology based credits, which are not very much feasible because the technology is not very much feasible these days, while the other category comes from the nature based solutions. So the nature based solutions is the pure you can say the future of the carbon markets in next 5 to 10 years time, because the nature based solution projects constitutes of the forestry based projects or agricultural based projects or mangrove based projects. And recently we had formed since in the Southeast Asia, this kind of momentum is having a low low interest. So recently we had incorporated a joint venture company with Shell to develop more and more projects in India and nearby nations related to the nature-based solution. And another category comes is the avoidance base. So during last 15 years, our region had majorly worked over the avoidance based credits. So the credits which are coming from renewable energy projects or energy efficiency projects or mass transportation system projects like Delhi Metro is getting that such kind of benefit. So these are the two different categories, and as of now, avoidance-based credits, the credits originated from India are varying. The broad range is in between $0.5 to $10, while the absorption-based credits are ranging in between $10 to $15. Although the absorption-based credits are not very much originated from India, but slowly and slowly, by in the near future, next 3 to 5 years time, we would be able to see majority of the credits may be generated from this segment. Then coming over the phases of industry, since we are into this industry from year 2007, we had gone through all the phases of ups and downs. You can say there are three different phases of the industry that we had gone through. One is starting from 1993, that means formation of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Thereafter, 1997, adaptation of Kyoto Protocol. After that, 2005, the adaptation of the carbon markets. You can say start of the carbon market was there, and then Vinod informed us about the 2012 dip of the carbon markets. Thereafter, 2015, world had gone through the observation of signing of Paris Agreement 2015-16, and now actually we are into the 2021-2022 market, where the Paris Agreement had already been started its implementation. COP26 was the most important COP after COP21. You can say that means adaptation of the Paris Agreement. Now, afterwards, the whole carbon markets, as of now, it was rightly said, as of now, for the last 8 years, only the voluntary market, whatever the credits originated from India, were majorly consumed under the voluntary market. And now we would be able to see the new markets which are upcoming under Article 6.2, 6.4 of the Paris Agreement. And the domestic market is also upcoming under the leadership of Bureau of Energy Efficiency, Ministry of Power. So they are about to get their powers under Energy Conservation Act 2001, while Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change will remain the nodal agency for the international communication in respect to the Government of India. Apart from that, now the environmental attributes, like these are the environmental attributes, you can say, which are coming from the renewable projects, energy efficiency projects, or maybe absorption or avoidance based projects. So we can categorize the same into three different parts. Again, one is the virtual PPAs, which is getting quite famous. Like David had told us about the Singapore based organizations. They are looking to get into the virtual PPA sort of thing, where in different forms and formats, electricity may be sold to the local company or maybe to the power exchange, and then environmental attributes may be then transferred to the buyer. Again, then the carbon credits, which is around 15-16-year-old industry. And apart from that, the IREX, International Renewable Certificates, or Indian Renewable Certificates, or we can call them as GOs, Guarantee of Origins, which is a majority time we call them at the European Union, and TIGER and other similar commodities are there. So there are 3-4 different environmental commodities, forms and formats are there. And again, various programs are there like CDM, VCS, Gold Standard, GCC, IREC, TIGER, and they had given the different terms and terminologies for single carbon credit, which is again 1 ton CO2. So at last, I want to comment over the challenges related to the present present scenario and the future carbon market. Since during last 7-8 years, there were not much traction about the carbon markets globally, not only in India. And so the new fresh manpower to execute the projects, to understand the carbon market, to understand the climate change issues, or getting the registration verification processes. So this is the the non-availability of the trained manpower is the major issue that our industry is facing about. Since we are into the consulting domain, our industry is also facing the same. Then the third-party inspection companies are also facing the same. Again, because the high demand is there in the carbon market, so various suppliers are there, and so the big bottleneck is being there again at the secretariat level of that carbon credit standards like CDM, VCS gold standard, because they do not also have manpower to execute 500 or 1000 number of projects request at the time for the registration or verification or issuances. Again, the last point is related to the knowledge availability at the organization's level about the carbon market, when the project should be applied for the registration, when either it should be applied for the voluntary market or compliance market or the domestic market which is upcoming. So again, at last, there is quite a clarity that we foresee various organizations are now highly or heavily investing into the voluntary carbon market, since there is not much conflict related to the Article 6 carbon credits or the double counting issue that may arise with the NDC and the Article 6. So various organizations are now looking for investing into the nature-based solution projects or technological based projects. So there is a high traction in the market, but once the challenges related to the regulatory risks and the challenges related to the manpower availability or the knowledge or the double counting issue, our carbon market will do flourish at its peak. As of now, it was in various studies, it was observed like around the voluntary carbon market business potential is around $1 to $2 billion, and which may increase to to 10 billion or 20 billion dollar by next 3 to 5 years. Again, there was a new story that I gone through that is related to the global carbon market value as of now. It's including the compliance markets, regional compliance market, which are going on there in the form of EU ETS, European Union Emission Trading Scheme, or Korea Emission Trading Scheme, or so in South Africa there is mechanism. In America and Canada there are some mechanisms. So around $760 billion, which is 2.5 times as compared to the year 2020 market. It's a high soar in the carbon markets, and in near future we foresee that there will be high traction. So again, to meet the Paris Agreement era, the Paris Agreement targets of capping 1.5 degree centigrade temperature targets, so around 50 to 60 billion carbon credits would be the requirement in near future, depending over the net zero targets that had been adopted by the nations. How are they going to put force to meet that particular target? But if it's at the normal phase, then it would be 50 to 60 billion carbon credits requirement would be there in every year basis. So yeah, that was the last comment of mine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manish. I think there's one question from the audience. We'll take other questions, but I think specifically for you that I think renewable projects is clear, and they've known about this and they've been active on this. But energy efficiency projects, any examples that you have that have been approved for carbon credits, and how can generating carbon credits help the financial viability, attractiveness, returns of energy efficiency projects? Any examples or perspectives from your side on that?
So coming over the second question related to the carbon finance in the form of selling carbon credits. So it would be definitely, so first energy efficiency with the help of energy efficiency project, we will be saving the energy obviously in the form of thermal or electrical. Apart from that, there would be the second revenue source in the form of generating or getting the project registered, then verified, and then sell the carbon credit. And depending over the crediting period, around crediting period. So in case of CDM mechanism, it was because now the projects are not getting registered under CDM mechanism. We are waiting to get the new regulations under Article 6.4. Apart from that, in VCA's gold standard DC, depending over the eligibility criteria of the project, the start date and the technology, we can apply for the registration, and we would be able to secure carbon finance in the form of selling carbon credit. The type of energy efficiency project that we can register. So any kind of energy efficiency project, we can get it registered depending over the baseline. Baseline, that means in the absence of our project activity, what would be the energy utilization scenario was there in the absence of the new project activity or the energy efficiency measure that we have taken. Apart from that, we also have to prove the additionality. So why we need carbon credit revenues, and if you would be able to prove either in the form of showing the financial barrier, or in the form of showing technological barrier or other kind of barrier, we would be able to get them registered. So like exothermic reaction projects are there, waste heat recovery projects are there, energy efficiency in boilers, energy efficiency in furnaces, green building projects, thereafter energy efficient lighting projects. So any kind of measure if we'll do take which helps us to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, either carbon dioxide or methane or HFC, PFC, SF6, N2O and NF3. So any of these 7 greenhouse gases, if you are able to save directly or indirectly in the form of say energy efficiency project, then we would be able to apply for the benefits.
Thank you. I will then, I think, move to the next stage of the discussion. I think next 10 minutes, there's a couple of questions I would pose to the 3 panelists, and then again in the maybe the reverse order this time, starting with you, Manish, and invite you to comment on that. And then finally, there are some questions from the audience that we would like to take on. I think there's one overall question around the policy framework and what you would like to see as this market develops in India specifically. The role of government and policy. What would be an ideal framework? What might that look like for India? Manish, we can start with you.
So we are waiting, Indian project developers or the project owners are waiting for the migration of the CDM projects which are registered, and so migration would happen under Article 6.4. So we are waiting for the types of projects that would be allowed to get migrated, and the new types of projects that can be allowed to get registered. And again, there should not be any conflict in between the compliance market, domestic compliance market, or compliance market. It will be generated under Article 6.4 in reference to the voluntary carbon market. So we as being project developer, or in many cases we are also for few projects we are the project owner, so we do anticipate that this clarity should come as soon as possible from Government of India. And in the form of formation of the national carbon market also, and the transition of projects and new projects. So these are the 3 different aspects we need to consider, and that should be done very easily with the help of various stakeholder meetings. So that is the expectation we do have in reference to the new regulation related to carbon market. Apart from that, since India, we have experienced like the PAT, perform achievement trade mechanism is there, renewable certificate mechanism is there, electricity market is there. So there should be the bilateral trading should also be allowed. So if you see the European Union emission trading scheme or other carbon markets or voluntary markets, there is less intervention related to the buying and selling of the credits. So that should not be too much regulated. It should be the market that should decide. Either they want exchange, either they want the over-the-counter markets, and what should be the prices. So over regulation should also be not there. So that is the expectation of ours.
Thank you. David, over to you. I think also the broader question in terms of other markets that you're familiar with in Asia Pacific, how is the policy framework evolving? Anything that we can learn from there?
I think, and I think unfortunately at this juncture of time, most of the market in ASEAN is still quite fluid in terms of policy of renewable, of having this kind of emission trading. In Singapore per se, the government has decided, at least at this juncture of time, to adopt a carbon tax approach rather than emission trading, and also that also means that it kind of put us in a stage whereby you can't do further than until something happens, something different happens. But if you look at but that also means to say that it opens the door for several possibility. And there is no stopping a corporation to do something that's beyond that of fulfilling the carbon tax that is given by the government. For example, the carbon tax basically tells you that you got to pay this amount of money, but it doesn't push the corporation if they want to go to net zero. So that means to say that corporations are still sourcing from all over the region, especially as close as possible to their jurisdiction, in order to get credits or even RECs, and you find that it doesn't make sense sometimes for a specific jurisdiction to come up with their own standard, because unless they have a very strong market with enough capacity in the market itself. For example, if India itself has a great capacity, but for ASEAN region, we don't. Most of us do not have. We rely on each other. It's important that we see trade among each other. So that being said, we will heavily rely on the current international market like IREX or Tigris. You got the gold standard or Vera. So these are the 4 standards that we rely on. And then and basically based on the standard and based on what is seen as best practices among this standard, then you see the trade are going on. So further than that, I don't see it is wise for the market to go into a individual specific standard per se.
Thank you. Vinod, your comments?
Yeah, so I think one of the key issues, which also is linked to the trust as well as duplication, counting of duplication, etc., is really having some kind of a meta registry and then registries across various markets, right? So that the linkages between one kind of credit or the same project actually being qualified for 2 credits essentially are all eliminated, right? So this is, I think, work has been going on. World Bank has worked on it. We have also supported that initiative as a consultant. But that, I think, needs to be properly implemented. So then one clarity is this, that you need to have linked registries across different markets and registration of different kind of credits under the same standard, so that you can eliminate duplication, ensure traceability, and that kind of stuff. The second, I think, issue is which is hanging around that there are a number of different types of credits, right? Especially, let's say, carbon credits are okay, CRs, VRs, gold standard, that one. But then there is RECs, there are IREX, and there are e-certs, right, for example. And each of these are priced differently, they are controlled differently, they are qualified differently. RECs are, for example, very easy to qualify without any additionalities. Carbon credits are, on the other hand, require additionality to be proven, right? So there are different standards of qualifying. And as far as a buyer is concerned, or as far as a user is concerned, he needs to understand, if he has to become a carbon neutral, what kind of credit he should use to become carbon neutral, for example, or get to a net zero kind of a situation. So there has to be some kind of interlinking and standardization of these credits, the terms, and how they kind of trade across each other. Some work, I think, is already happening, but a proper internationally understood protocol possibly needs to be developed, that these credits can interchange with each other, or they can meet the same goal of becoming net zero in this session, right? So this is, I think, an important element. At some point in time, they should come. The third is the nature-based solutions. They're very nascent stage, and it looks like that, sooner or later, either renewable energy may be classified as baseline itself. That means that, it's already kind of competitive, so why fund it? That has been one of the questions, although I don't agree with that approach, but suppose that becomes an approach. In that case, how do you actually aggregate and approve and develop nature-based solutions? There is a lot of policy framework required for it. There are different ways that these can be funded upfront also, in some ways or other, right? You could actually aggregate at small farmer level or a small, generator level credits in some way and can finance them. So there is a lot of policy framework required for nature-based solutions, which is especially forestry, farming, for example. What kind of agricultural practices you have, methodologies to be developed there. So there is work to be done there, and I think that may be the third race dimension, because 75-80% of new demand may come from nature-based solutions, the sinks. So these are
Thank you.
my thoughts.
Thank you. Let's, I think, in the last 10 minutes, take some questions that the audience has posted. I think one question, maybe David, you want to answer that. Can we claim RE credit through REX and carbon credit simultaneously for a project? David, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. I think the quick answer is no, because at the end of the day, the attributes that come out of the credits, because the come out of the project must be used as per what is meant for. For example, if you talk about converting renewable energy into credits, then you could look into the grid emission factor, and then you convert it based on the megawatt hour being generated, right? And that per se equates to the number of emission that's being reduced because of the renewable energy. Now, if you don't convert that, then you use it straightforward directly, then you talk about using it as per megawatt hour, and that will equate to renewable energy certificates per certificate. So if you use one, you can't use the other.
Thank you. There's another question here that buildings are the biggest consumer of energy and emitters of carbon as a whole. However, at individual level, each building's consumption and possible reduction is small. How can policy or business help in aggregating and bringing this biggest emission in control? Any of the panelists want to comment on that? I think Vinod, you had started talking about aggregation as a alternate kind of business model. Maybe you want to talk about
Aggregation, I think, is a very important issue from energy efficiency perspective, because energy efficiency programs at building level, for example, at small community level, rural areas, small industries, they have very little, annual, but they can be aggregated into very large programs. So I think, for example, like in renewable energy, SECI started aggregating renewable energy, right? So buyers on one side, sellers on the other side, and you actually had large scale projects coming up because somebody came in and aggregated, right? Demand from various players. The same kind of aggregation structure could be really used, maybe, ESL itself, or maybe BE itself, or something else, where these programs can be registered as a program of activities. There is a standard methodology for that program of activity kind of strategy, and you can actually aggregate and then generate and transfer these credits, or transfer the values of these credits to them. Government, I think, can play an important role. Otherwise, some voluntary organization could come into and play a role. But I think government actually also might be able to play a role. And methodology is a simple standard. Maybe the pricing of the requirement of validation verification for these small programs could be slightly tweaked so that the expenses of validation verification are not very significant. So, but yes, the aggregation is the one way to do it.
Thank you. I think next couple of questions, Manish, I'll request you to take. I think there's one question in terms of, if you have a project in India, what's the process for going about to get a carbon credit certificate? And then there's another question on, you touched on it in your comments around the role of the Bureau of Energy Efficiency and MOEF. What is the difference in the role in terms of the proposed carbon market? Maybe you can take those two.
Yeah, so for any eligible project, there are three different options, or you can say four different options available. Either first option is to go with the IREC or TIGR type of mechanism, like the renewable energy attributes. Otherwise, we can go for the carbon credits. In renewable energy attributes, there are 2-3 options. Either if you want to go through IREC, International Renewable Certificate Standard, or either gold standard labeled IREC or TIGR, or various other standards are there in this domain. Otherwise, for carbon credit, since after 1 January 2021, we do not have any provision to get the new project registered. Either we can get provisional registration under CDM, but in the absence of host country approval letter, we would not be able to do the same, because Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, they are not issuing any new host country approval certificate for this mechanism under CDM. While we do have 3 additional options, or you can say standards. One is the verified carbon standard under VERA. The second one is a gold standard, and third one is the Global Carbon Council. So we need to check based on the date of commissioning, date of purchase order, additionality, baseline, we need to check which program do allow the registration, and once we'll do fix that yes, we want to go with for example VCS, verified carbon standard, then we need to start being as a consultant, we used to start writing PDD, project design document, supported by various documentation. Then we need to hire a third-party inspection company. Finally, we need to apply for the registration. If the project is already commissioned, we can get validation and verification simultaneously. And once the carbon credits are issued, we need to find a suitable buyer and sell the credits to monetize the same. So that is the standard process for any program, either CDM or VCS, gold standard, DCC. This is a standard program. While in case of environmental attribute, David already had informed, like it's very simple as compared to the carbon credit, because in carbon credit it's a complicated process, while in case of IRX it's a simple process. While the revenue which are originated from either in the form of renewable energy attributes, it's quite low as compared to carbon credits which are originated from India. It may be the different case in different countries. So this is the scenario related to any new project which are looking for the registration. And obviously whatever the registration processes which are available are only for the voluntary carbon market standards, not for the compliance market under CDM or you can say article 6.2 or 6.4 of the Paris Agreement. And yeah, so that is the status as of now. And another, what was the, Mr. Sengupta, what was the another
difference between the role of Bureau of Energy Efficiency and MOEF in terms of developing the carbon market in India?
So for international negotiation, international communication, Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change is the nodal agency, which is designated by Government of India. Now, since Bureau of Energy Efficiency, they do have some experience in the format of establishing perform, achieve and trade mechanism, getting into the different phases, buying, selling of the credits. So Bureau of Energy Efficiency under Ministry of Power, through Energy Conservation Act 2001, are getting to get empowered to form a domestic carbon market. So the domestic carbon market is will be focusing over the Indian geographical boundaries. While if you want to talk about the Article 6.2, 6.4 or international communication related to climate change or carbon markets, MOFCC would be the nodal agency.
Thank you very much. I think we are almost out of time, so let me take this opportunity to thank all the panelists. This has been a very interesting and engrossing discussion on a topic which is a lot of stakeholders have many questions around this, and this is something that's going to evolve over the next few years in line with both India as well as individual corporates' aspirations to go towards carbon neutrality and net zero. So let's kind of keep our fingers crossed and watch this space with interest. Thank you again to all the panelists. I think great set of questions from the audience as well. I hope we were able to cover most of those. And back to you, Afsha.
Thank you so much, everyone. And a very big thank you to all our attendees also. I think this dialogue won't have been a success with all of us here and such interesting questions coming in. A very quick thank you to our networking and outreach partners also who've helped make this event very successful. So I'm going to shout out my thanks to Griha, Ishre, Rama, and the India Smart Grid Forum, that is the ISGF. So very quickly, I'm going to introduce everyone here to the next session. We begin our next session in 1 minute, that is at 4 sharp, and this is going to be a fireside chat on the triple sector approach to achieve decarbonization, along with Dr. Gauri Singh and Dr. Satish Kumar from AAA. So please quickly go back to your lobbies and via the auditorium join the next session. That's a fireside chat. Thank you and good day.
Thank you very much.